The summer heat pressed down on Camp Pendleton like a heavy blanket as Captain Marcus Rodriguez stepped out of his air-conditioned office and into the blazing California sun. The Marine Corps base buzzed with its usual activity, but today felt different. Today was the annual Joint Services Leadership Conference, where military personnel from all branches gathered to discuss strategy, share experiences, and build relationships across the armed forces. Marcus had been looking forward to this event for weeks. As a decorated Marine captain with 2 tours in Afghanistan under his belt, he took pride in representing the Corps. His chest bore the ribbons that told the story of his service. The Combat Action Ribbon, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, and several others that marked him as a warrior who had seen real action. At 32, he had worked his way up through the ranks, earning respect through dedication and courage. The conference hall was already filling with uniformed personnel when Marcus arrived. He recognized the different branches immediately. Navy officers in their crisp whites, Army personnel in their dress blues, Air Force members in their distinctive uniforms, and fellow Marines in their dress blues. The room hummed with conversation, as old friends reconnected and new introductions were made. Marcus grabbed a cup of coffee and began making his rounds. He had always been good at networking, understanding that relationships built in peacetime often proved crucial during operations. He exchanged business cards with an Army colonel who had just returned from a deployment in the Middle East, discussed logistics with a Navy commander who specialized in amphibious operations, and shared war stories with a fellow Marine major. As he moved through the crowd, Marcus noticed a woman in Army dress uniform standing near the registration table. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and a posture that spoke of decades of military bearing. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, but rather the fact that she seemed to be studying the conference materials with intense focus, making notes in a leather portfolio. The woman's uniform was impeccable, but Marcus found himself unable to clearly see her rank insignia from his position across the room. In the military, rank determined protocol, and understanding the hierarchy was essential for proper military courtesy. As a captain, Marcus held a respectable position, but he knew there were many officers who outranked him significantly. Curious about the newcomer and always eager to expand his network, Marcus decided to introduce himself. He straightened his uniform jacket, ensured his ribbons were properly aligned, and walked across the room with the confident stride that had served him well throughout his career. "Good afternoon," Marcus said as he approached the woman, offering his most professional smile. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Captain Marcus Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps." The woman looked up from her portfolio and returned his greeting with a warm but measured smile. "Good afternoon, Captain Rodriguez. I'm Colonel Sarah Mitchell." She extended her hand for a firm handshake, her grip conveying both strength and professionalism. "Pleasure to meet you, Colonel Mitchell," Marcus replied, mentally noting that she outranked him and adjusting his demeanor accordingly. "First time at this conference?" "Actually, no," Colonel Mitchell replied. "I've attended several times over the years. It's always valuable to connect with colleagues from other branches and share perspectives on leadership challenges." As they talked, Marcus found himself impressed by Colonel Mitchell's knowledge and experience. She spoke with authority about military strategy, demonstrated deep understanding of joint operations, and shared insights that could only come from extensive field experience. Her comments about recent developments in military technology and tactics showed she was clearly someone who stayed current with evolving warfare concepts. "You seem to have quite a breadth of experience, Colonel," Marcus observed. "What's your current assignment?" "I'm currently working in strategic planning," she replied, being deliberately vague. "It involves coordination between multiple branches and agencies." Their conversation was interrupted when a young lieutenant approached with a question about the afternoon's schedule. Marcus watched as Colonel Mitchell handled the inquiry with patience and clarity, providing detailed information about the various sessions and workshops available. Her knowledge of the entire conference agenda suggested she wasn't just an attendee but someone with inside information about the planning process. As the lieutenant walked away, Marcus found himself increasingly curious about this Colonel Mitchell. Her uniform bore ribbons that indicated extensive combat experience and numerous decorations, but he still couldn't get a clear view of her rank insignia. The conference hall was crowded, and the lighting made it difficult to discern specific details. "Colonel Mitchell," Marcus said, deciding to satisfy his curiosity with what he thought was harmless banter, "I have to ask, and please forgive the informal question, but I'm having trouble seeing your rank clearly in this lighting. Would you mind sharing what your actual rank is? I like to make sure I'm showing proper military courtesy." The question seemed innocent enough to Marcus. In his experience, most officers were happy to clarify their rank, especially when it came to ensuring proper protocol was followed. Military courtesy was serious business, and getting it wrong could be embarrassing for everyone involved. Colonel Mitchell's expression shifted slightly, and Marcus caught what might have been a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Are you sure you want to know, Captain Rodriguez?" she asked, her tone carrying a note that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. "Of course," Marcus replied with a confident grin. "I mean, how high could it be, right? You look like you might be a lieutenant colonel, or maybe a full colonel. Either way, I want to make sure I'm addressing you correctly." The question hung in the air between them, and Marcus noticed that their conversation had begun to draw the attention of nearby personnel. A Navy commander who had been talking with an Air Force major had paused mid-sentence, and a small circle of officers was beginning to form around them, though Marcus wasn't sure why. Colonel Mitchell set down her portfolio and looked directly at Marcus, her expression becoming more serious but not unfriendly. "Captain Rodriguez, I appreciate your attention to military courtesy. Since you asked directly, I'll give you a direct answer." She paused, and Marcus noticed that the background noise in the conference hall seemed to have diminished. More officers had stopped their conversations and were paying attention to this exchange, though Marcus still didn't understand why a simple question about rank had garnered such interest. "Captain Rodriguez," Colonel Mitchell said, her voice carrying clearly across the small gathering that had formed. "My rank is Brigadier General." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Brigadier General. 1 star. A flag officer. Someone who commanded thousands of troops and operated at the highest levels of military leadership. Someone who was so far above his own rank that the gulf between them was almost incomprehensible. Marcus felt his face flush hot as the realization sank in. He had just asked a general to clarify her rank because he assumed it couldn't be that high. The casual, almost dismissive way he had phrased his question suddenly seemed not just inappropriate but borderline insulting. The officers who had gathered around them were now staring openly, some with expressions of shock, others barely concealing smiles at Marcus's obvious discomfort. A few were whispering among themselves, and Marcus realized this moment was about to become legendary in all the wrong ways. "General Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice tight with embarrassment as he snapped to attention and rendered a crisp salute. "I sincerely apologize for my presumption. I had no idea of your rank, and my question was completely inappropriate." General Mitchell returned his salute with the practiced ease of someone who had received thousands of them over the course of her career. "At ease, Captain. And there's no need to apologize. You asked a legitimate question about military courtesy." But Marcus knew better. He had made assumptions based on appearances, and those assumptions had led him to commit a breach of protocol that would be talked about for years to come. In the military, where respect for rank and hierarchy was fundamental, his casual dismissal of the possibility that she could be a high-ranking officer was not just a mistake. It was a lesson in humility that he would never forget. The conference hall seemed to buzz with renewed energy as word of the exchange began to spread. Marcus could hear fragments of whispered conversations around him, and he knew that by the end of the day, everyone at the conference would know about the Marine captain who asked a general to prove her rank. As General Mitchell excused herself to attend a briefing with other senior officers, Marcus stood rooted to his spot, processing what had just happened. His confidence, built over years of successful military service, had taken a serious hit. But perhaps more importantly, he was beginning to understand that there was still much he didn't know about leadership, respect, and the dangers of making assumptions about others. The first session of the conference was about to begin, but Marcus knew that his real education had already started. The lesson he had just learned would prove to be more valuable than anything covered in the scheduled workshops and seminars. He had just encountered a leader whose presence and authority had humbled him completely, and he was beginning to realize that true leadership came in forms he had never expected to find. Word traveled fast through the conference hall, and by the time the first formal session began, nearly everyone knew about Captain Rodriguez's encounter with General Mitchell. As attendees filed into the main auditorium for the opening ceremony, conversations buzzed with variations of the story. Some versions had Marcus demanding to see her identification. Others had him questioning whether she was even military. The truth was embarrassing enough, but military gossip had a way of growing with each telling. Marcus found himself a seat in the back row, hoping to avoid further attention. His cheeks still burned with embarrassment, and he could feel eyes on him as officers passed by. A few nodded sympathetically, understanding that anyone could make such a mistake, while others seemed amused by the spectacle. The military was a small world, and stories like this became legend. The conference moderator, a Navy admiral, took the podium and called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have some of the finest military leaders from all branches here today. I'd like to begin by introducing our keynote speaker. Someone whose career exemplifies the best of American military service and leadership." Marcus looked up with mild interest, expecting to see another generic senior officer who would deliver the usual speech about teamwork and dedication. But his stomach dropped when he recognized the figure walking toward the podium. Please welcome Brigadier General Sarah Mitchell, United States Army, whose remarkable career has taken her from a second lieutenant in military intelligence to her current role as Deputy Director of Strategic Operations at the Pentagon. The applause was thunderous, but Marcus barely heard it over the sound of his own heartbeat. General Mitchell approached the microphone with the same measured confidence he had witnessed earlier, but now he understood the weight behind that presence. This wasn't just any general. This was someone operating at the highest levels of military leadership. "Thank you for that introduction," General Mitchell began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium's sound system. "I'm honored to be here with so many dedicated professionals who represent the finest traditions of American military service." As she spoke, Marcus learned details about her background that made his earlier assumptions seem even more foolish. General Mitchell had graduated from West Point in 1995. One of only a handful of women in her class, she had served multiple combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, commanded a battalion in some of the war's most dangerous regions, and earned decorations for valor that most officers could only dream about. "When I was commissioned as a second lieutenant 28 years ago," General Mitchell continued, "I faced skepticism from some who questioned whether a woman belonged in combat roles. I was told that I would never command men in battle, never earn their respect, and certainly never reach flag rank." The auditorium was completely silent now. Marcus found himself leaning forward, captivated despite his embarrassment. This was not the usual military speech about honor and duty. This was personal testimony from someone who had broken barriers and fought for every advancement. "My first deployment to Iraq came in 2003, just months after the invasion. I was a young captain then, assigned to a forward operating base near Fallujah. The soldiers under my command were skeptical. Most had never served under a female officer in combat. They tested me constantly, questioning my decisions, waiting for me to fail." General Mitchell paused, scanning the audience. Her eyes briefly met Marcus's across the crowded room, but her expression gave no indication that she recognized him. 3 months into that deployment, our base came under heavy mortar attack. Insurgents had positioned themselves in a nearby building complex, and their fire was devastating our motor pool. The base commander was injured in the first wave, and as the senior officer present, I found myself in command of the response. Marcus noticed that several junior officers in the audience were taking notes. This wasn't just a speech. It was a masterclass in leadership under pressure. "I had 2 choices," General Mitchell continued. "I could wait for reinforcements and hope the attack would end, or I could take decisive action to neutralize the threat. I chose action. I led a team of 20 soldiers in a direct assault on the insurgent position." The general's voice remained steady, but Marcus could hear the weight of memory in her words. This was someone who had made life and death decisions under the worst possible circumstances. The operation was successful. We eliminated the threat and saved American lives. But more importantly, I earned something that couldn't be given or ordered: the respect of the soldiers under my command. From that day forward, they never questioned my authority or my commitment to their welfare. A Navy commander sitting near Marcus whispered to his colleague, "I remember reading about that operation in the intelligence reports. They called it textbook small unit tactics." General Mitchell's speech continued, detailing a career that had taken her through multiple combat commands, staff positions at the highest levels of the Army, and finally to her current role at the Pentagon. She spoke about the evolution of warfare, the importance of joint operations between military branches, and the leadership challenges facing the modern military. Leadership, she said, approaching the conclusion of her remarks, is not about rank or position. It's about service, sacrifice, and the willingness to put the mission and your people above your own interests. True leaders earn respect through their actions, not their insignia. As Marcus listened, he began to understand the magnitude of his earlier mistake. This wasn't just about misreading someone's rank. He had made assumptions about capability and authority based on superficial impressions. General Mitchell had spent decades proving herself in the most demanding circumstances imaginable, and he had dismissed her with casual arrogance. The general's speech concluded to sustained applause, and she began to leave the podium. But before she reached her seat, the conference moderator called her back to the microphone. "General Mitchell, we have time for a few questions if you're willing." She nodded and returned to the podium. Hands shot up throughout the auditorium. The first question came from an Air Force colonel, asking about inter-service cooperation. The second was from a Marine major inquiring about leadership development programs. Then, from the middle section of the auditorium, a Army lieutenant colonel stood up. "General Mitchell, you mentioned earning respect from skeptical subordinates early in your career. Do you still encounter people who underestimate your capabilities based on assumptions?" General Mitchell smiled, and Marcus thought he detected a hint of amusement in her expression. "That's an excellent question, Colonel. Yes, it still happens occasionally. Just this afternoon, actually, I met a young Marine captain who assumed my rank couldn't be very high based on his initial impression." The auditorium erupted in quiet laughter and murmurs. Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him, and he wished he could disappear into his seat. But General Mitchell wasn't finished. "But you know what impressed me about that encounter?" When he realized his mistake, that young captain immediately corrected his behavior and showed proper military courtesy. That's the mark of a professional officer. The ability to recognize errors and adapt quickly. The tension in Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly. Rather than humiliating him further, General Mitchell had turned his mistake into a teaching moment while acknowledging his recovery. It was a masterful display of leadership, firm but fair, educational without being punitive. "The truth is," General Mitchell continued, "we all make assumptions based on incomplete information. The key is to remain open to new data and adjust our thinking accordingly. Some of the best leaders I know are those who can admit when they're wrong and learn from those moments." After the session ended, Marcus remained in his seat as the auditorium emptied around him. He was processing not just his embarrassment, but the lesson he had received. General Mitchell hadn't just corrected his misconception about her rank, she had demonstrated a level of leadership that he aspired to achieve. A tap on his shoulder interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see a Marine colonel with a knowing smile. "Rodriguez, right? Don't look so dejected, son." "We've all been there. Have you, sir?" Marcus asked. "Back in 2008, I mistook a Navy admiral for a commander at a joint exercise. Spent the entire first day giving him orders until someone pulled me aside and explained the situation." The colonel chuckled. "The admiral was gracious about it, just like General Mitchell was with you. Sometimes, the best leaders are the ones who can turn our mistakes into learning opportunities." As Marcus finally stood to leave the auditorium, he realized that his encounter with General Mitchell had become something more than just an embarrassing mistake. It had become a watershed moment in his understanding of leadership, respect, and the danger of assumptions. The woman he had casually dismissed had just delivered one of the most impressive demonstrations of grace under pressure he had ever witnessed. The conference continued for 2 more days, but Marcus knew that the most important lesson he would take away had already been learned. General Sarah Mitchell had shown him what real leadership looked like, and he was determined to apply those lessons to his own career. The embarrassment would fade, but the education would last forever. The remainder of the conference proved to be a transformative experience for Marcus Rodriguez, though not in the way he had originally expected. Instead of simply networking and attending routine briefings, he found himself observing every interaction through a new lens, paying attention to how different leaders carried themselves and commanded respect without demanding it. During the afternoon breakout sessions, Marcus made a point of attending workshops led by senior officers from all branches. He listened to a Navy admiral discuss crisis management, watched an Air Force general facilitate a discussion on innovation in military technology, and participated in a joint operations simulation led by an Army colonel who had served multiple combat deployments. Each session reinforced the lesson he had learned from his encounter with General Mitchell. True leadership was about competence, character, and the ability to inspire others, not about demanding recognition or respect. That evening, the conference hosted a formal reception for all attendees. Marcus had initially planned to skip the event, still feeling the sting of his earlier embarrassment, but his roommate, Major David Chen, convinced him otherwise. "You can't hide from this, Marcus," Chen said as they prepared for the reception. The general handled it professionally. "It's C&70, 2 PS, and you recovered well. Now you need to move forward and show that you learned something from the experience." The reception was held in the base's Officers Club, an elegant space that had hosted military gatherings for decades. As Marcus entered the room, he noticed the same mixture of branches and ranks that had been present throughout the conference. The atmosphere was more relaxed now, with officers sharing drinks and engaging in informal conversation. Marcus was talking with a group of junior officers when he noticed a commotion near the entrance. General Mitchell had arrived, and she was immediately surrounded by senior officers eager to speak with her. Marcus watched from across the room as she engaged with each person, listening intently to their concerns and offering thoughtful responses. Even in this social setting, her leadership presence was unmistakable. "Quite a woman," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to find Colonel James Patterson, a Marine officer he had met during one of the afternoon sessions. "Yes, sir, she certainly is," Marcus replied. "I served with her in Afghanistan in 2010, Patterson continued. "She was a lieutenant colonel then, commanding a battalion in one of the most dangerous provinces in the country. I've never seen anyone handle pressure the way she did. Calm, decisive, always thinking 3 steps ahead." Patterson took a sip of his drink and continued. "There was an incident where her base was surrounded by insurgents for nearly 72 hours. Communications were down, supplies were running low, and some of the younger soldiers were starting to panic. But General Mitchell, she was Colonel Mitchell then, never lost her composure. She organized the defense, rationed supplies, and kept morale up through sheer force of personality." Marcus found himself completely absorbed in the story. "How did it end, sir?" "She led a breakout operation that not only got her people to safety but also captured several high-value targets in the process. The whole operation became a case study at the War College." Patterson looked across the room at General Mitchell. "That's when I knew she was destined for flag rank. Some people are just born leaders." As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself gravitating toward conversations about leadership and military service. He spoke with officers who had served under challenging conditions, listened to stories of innovation and adaptation, and began to understand that the military was filled with exceptional individuals who had earned their positions through merit and dedication. Near the end of the reception, Marcus noticed General Mitchell standing alone on a balcony overlooking the base. She appeared to be enjoying a quiet moment away from the crowd. After several minutes of internal debate, he decided to approach her. "General Mitchell," he said, rendering a proper salute as he approached. She returned the salute and smiled. "Captain Rodriguez, how are you enjoying the conference?" "Very much, ma'am. I've learned quite a bit." Marcus paused, gathering his courage. "General, I wanted to apologize again for my behavior this afternoon. It was unprofessional and inappropriate." General Mitchell studied him for a moment. "Captain, may I give you some advice?" "Of course, ma'am. Stop apologizing. You made a mistake. You corrected it immediately. And you've clearly learned from the experience. That's exactly what professional officers do. Dwelling on it serves no purpose. She gestured toward the base spread out below them. "Do you know what I see when I look at this place, Captain?" "No, ma'am. I see thousands of men and women who have made mistakes, learned from them, and become better leaders as a result. Every officer worth their salt has stories of errors in judgment, moments of poor decision-making, and times when they wished they had acted differently." General Mitchell turned to face him directly. "What matters is not whether you make mistakes. You will. We all do. But how you respond to those mistakes, and what you learn from them." Marcus nodded, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Thank you, ma'am. That's very gracious of you." "It's not gracious, Captain. It's practical. The military is too small, and our mission's too important for us to waste time on grudges or embarrassment. We need officers who can admit when they're wrong, adapt quickly, and move forward with better judgment." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several senior officers who needed to speak with General Mitchell about logistics for the following day's activities. As she excused herself to attend to these duties, she paused and looked back at Marcus. "Captain Rodriguez, I hope you'll continue to ask questions and challenge your assumptions. Just maybe be a little more tactful about it in the future." Marcus smiled for the first time since the afternoon's incident. "Yes, ma'am, I will." The final day of the conference featured a series of panel discussions and closing ceremonies. Marcus participated fully in all the activities, but he found himself paying particular attention to leadership styles and communication techniques. During a panel on joint operations, he watched how General Mitchell facilitated discussion between officers from different branches, ensuring that everyone's voice was heard while keeping the conversation focused and productive. In a workshop on mentorship, she shared insights about developing junior officers that revealed the depth of thought she put into leadership development. She spoke about the importance of challenging subordinates while providing support, setting high standards while recognizing individual strengths, and creating environments where people could learn from their mistakes without fear of career-ending consequences. "The best leaders I know," General Mitchell said during the mentorship session, "are those who can see potential in others and help them realize that potential. Sometimes that means correcting behavior, sometimes it means providing opportunities for growth, and sometimes it means simply showing people that they're capable of more than they think they are." Marcus realized that this was exactly what she had done for him. By handling his mistake with grace and turning it into a learning opportunity, she had demonstrated the kind of leadership he wanted to emulate in his own career. As the conference concluded, Marcus found himself changed in ways he hadn't expected. The embarrassment of his initial encounter with General Mitchell had evolved into something more valuable: a deeper understanding of what true leadership looked like, and a commitment to developing those qualities in himself. 6 months later, Marcus received orders for a new assignment that would put him in charge of training junior officers. As he prepared for this new role, he often thought about General Mitchell and the lessons he had learned from their encounter. He established mentoring relationships with the young lieutenants under his command, creating environments where they could ask questions without fear of judgment and learn from their mistakes without career-damaging consequences. When one of his lieutenants made a significant error in judgment during a training exercise, Marcus found himself drawing on the example General Mitchell had set. Instead of humiliating the young officer, he used the incident as a teaching opportunity, helping the lieutenant understand what had gone wrong and how to avoid similar mistakes in the future. "Sir," the lieutenant said after their private discussion, "thank you for handling that the way you did. I was sure you were going to destroy my career." Marcus smiled, remembering his own fears after his encounter with General Mitchell. "Lieutenant, the only way that mistake could destroy your career is if you don't learn from it. My job is to help you become a better officer, not to punish you for being human." The impact of General Mitchell's leadership extended beyond Marcus's individual growth. He began to share the story of their encounter with other officers, always emphasizing the grace and professionalism she had shown. The story became part of his teaching repertoire, illustrating important lessons about assumptions, respect, and the characteristics of true leadership. Years later, when Marcus himself achieved the rank of colonel, he received an invitation to speak at the same annual conference where he had first met General Mitchell. As he prepared his remarks, he reflected on how that single embarrassing encounter had shaped his entire approach to leadership. standing at the same podium where General Mitchell had delivered her keynote address. Marcus looked out at an audience filled with officers from all branches of the military. He could see the same mixture of confidence and ambition that he had once possessed, and he understood that many of them would learn their most important lessons, not from formal instruction, but from moments of challenge and humility. Leadership, Marcus began his speech, is not about commanding respect through rank or position. It's about earning respect through character, competence, and the grace to turn every interaction, even the difficult ones, into opportunities for growth and learning. As he spoke, he thought about General Sarah Mitchell, who had demonstrated these principles so effectively that they had changed the trajectory of his career. Her example had shown him that the best leaders are those who lift others up, even when those others have made mistakes. It was a lesson that had made him not just a better officer, but a better person. The story of the Marine captain who asked a general to prove her rank had become legend within military circles, but the real story was about what came after. About how one moment of grace under pressure had rippled outward to influence countless other lives and careers. General Mitchell had shown that true leadership was not about authority or hierarchy, but about the courage to be better than the situation demanded and the wisdom to help others learn from their mistakes. That night, as the conference concluded and officers prepared to return to their various assignments, Marcus reflected on how a single moment of embarrassment had become one of the most valuable experiences of his military career. He had learned that the best leaders are often found in unexpected places, and that the most important lessons sometimes come disguised as our most humbling moments.